Good morning, you're on Ben's World. That's postmanproduction.wordpress.com, but you just go Ben Vidgen or Ben Postman Productions. You shouldn't go too far wrong. Um, I've been doing a little post today here looking at the fires in Western Australia, and it's sparked by an article that was put out by the New Zealand Herald recently, suggesting that there's this conspiracy theory washing over Australia that the fire's actually been stimulated and that it's all part of this Agenda 21 and it's all ridiculous and people are that are nuts and it's one more proof how dangerous social media is and we shouldn't let people have the internet and only corporations should be able to control the news and Facebook and I should tell you what the truth is because I say so. Probably a little bit dramatised, but you get my basic point. The issue, before we get even into that particular article, of course, always boils back to the issue, or the issue of climate change. So best put my cards on the table before we go down that rabbit hole. My name's Ben Vidgen. I'm an investigative journalist. I write books, I do newspapers, I do blogs, I do radio shows. But my family is involved in the ski industry. My father used to import the skis into New Zealand of fish skis, marker bindings, dolomite boots, and a whole bunch of other stuff. He got out of the ski industry in the 1990s. Pretty much saw that it wasn't probably a very reliable way to make your learning even more, and he went back to Australia, which is where he's from. I remember asking my brother at the time. I just watched a series called The Paperman, which was basically a dramatised series on Rupert Murdoch, in which Rupert Murdoch is basically his media tool is used to basically go along with the establishment. So while the world's actually got climate change, his paper's actually helping covering it up, and all for the sake of power and riches and glory. And I remember it had a huge impact on me watching that movie. And I remember saying to my brother, there was a ski instructor at that time and worked for several companies, ski factories overseas, said, well, what do you think about climate change, Reese? And he turned around to me and said, well, I'll believe in climate change when they need snow machines at Whistler. Well, they now need snow machines from top to bottom. And pretty much even at the time, my family was discussing that issue, like, if you had a ski field under 1,200 feet, you just couldn't get insurance. That's why a lot of these things were shutting down. So the issue from my bringing and the way I push it going up through the 1980s, 1990s was that I definitely believed in the idea of climate change. And I found it really interesting because a lot of the people today that are now insisting climate change exists and if you don't believe that, then you're a fucking nutter. Well, the people telling me back then saying, well, actually, no, the science is not out, it's proof and conclusive. And the only thing that really changed was actually the funding available. I remember when Al Gore made his something or other truth movie. That was like that almost switched the flitch in New Zealand. Suddenly academia was all on board and there was no debate. This is how we had to go along with it. I have always taken the role, basically looked at little bits and pieces, listened to everyone else and backwards and forwards. And I always taken this role as a journalist that when you want to find out what the truth of something is, when you've got two experts both providing information, insisting that the other smartest and other people dumb, you look at where the money follows you. Which fast forward to the modern day is that I do believe climate change is taking place, and more importantly, that whether you want to get into the science of carbon and all this other particular sort of issues which go along about the causes of climate change or not, I mean, the fact of the matter is less fossil fuels, and a lot of the green ideas are things that we should be doing anyway if we want to have a healthy planet. Like, bottom line is, man's definitely contributing to the way that this planet is packing up. Seriously, everything we touch is, incredible. But the issue is that's not being discussed is who's funding what their motives are for it, and the hypocrisy. And that always bugs me, because I see in New Zealand, for example, we have a government that's very big on carbon credits, and I want to get behind this raising the price of the carbon credits. This is the same government that's behind Rocket Lab. Now, Rocket Lab alone is a hypersonic rocket which produces massive carbon footprint. Nobody talks about that. Nobody. And they want to launch next, their plan is to launch one of these things every 2 years. No one's talking about who's actually going to pay for that. Likewise for Tiwai Point, like what happens is every year the government, for 3 years, government goes to get elected out. Tiwai Point says we're going to shut it down. The government turns around and capitulates, so we end up paying their carbon credits. So raising the carbon credits is, one more way of showing you that this is, you know, creating a tax to solve the world's problems is probably not the smartest idea out there. You know, there are better ways to do it. And a lot of what we see also is moving from towards basically fossil fuels, using one finite resource, which I don't believe, you know, is a particularly sane energy policy, to the use of smart technologies which use lithium, so we're really just swapping one finite fuel for another. Probably not a good way to go about it. So yes, we are definitely contributing to it, but when you go and look at the issue of the fires in Australia, and this native that was put out by the Herald, that this idea that there's an Agenda 2030 out there, or an Agenda 21, and they're out to depopulate the planet, it's all crazy shit by people who don't believe in climate conspiracy, that are right-wing fucking, you know. Well, I'm not right-wing. I'm actually come from a fairly punk rock, you know, anarchist background. So, you know, again, this is make a word, say it enough times, it becomes true. People believe that if you don't, this is what you must be. Well, it's not the case at all. The video that we look at here, I'll give you about 15, 16 contributing factors to the fires that are happening in Australia. Some of those are things which I knew about from my father, who's you know, also surfs. He's 84 years old, still surfs the back waves in Coolangatta. Our family is actually involved in the Currumbin. We started the Currumbin Bird Sanctuary in Australia. So, you know, as far as our environmental record goes, we've got a pretty family-wise, we've got a pretty good track record of actually getting behind our planet. My father's grown up in the sea all his life, and he talks about these 70-year cycles. I believe him. I remember seeing man out in Sumner, where, you know, got the big long sand spat at Christchurch, which is, you know, photos from 40, 50 years ago. It wasn't there. Cycler is where it is circular. That is a contributing factor. They talk about these Antarctic drafts, which are also blowing wind off Antarctica. Again, not a climate change factor. Something that happens occurs. There are the Earth moves around with relation to the sun. There are solar cycles. These are all contributing factors. There are arsons. 87% of the fires, and this is the core fact, 87% of all the fires that have been started in Australia didn't occur because it was hot. I'm sure it was. That didn't help. But the people that started them were people. That's it. They're arson. We also have multiple cases basically showing of the use of the Australian military, because they're all into this, like, oh yeah, we've got to be part of the whole war on terrorism, we've got to be out with America and NATO. And so they've been spending millions of money on military exercise, and we've been seeing everywhere around these days there's a policeman with a gun or a new bulletproof vest, you know, because again, these people that insist to know the truth, it's funny how they keep getting more and more armed guards to protect them from the terrorists. Well, you know, I'm not a terrorist. I don't advocate violence. I do believe that we should all get rid of guns, starting with the police and the army. No guns, no money, no one's going to get shot. Pretty bloody simple solution, really. You know, too simple, in fact. So these people are saying, oh yes, you know, when these military exercises were, again, the areas we show on that's happened at least on 3 times I managed to track down on Australian national television, covers a very large area, and in 2 of these cases, it's in the high-risk fire zone. Okay. Then, of course, the other factor you've got is the consumption of water. This idea that, oh no, we're going to make water something you have to pay for, but they've been selling it over shores and depleting them by building private water dams, by basically draining the areas actually out for bottled water. Those are all, these 15 factors that we talk about in the book are all very contributing factors, and they all collectively come together to form a perfect storm. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't talk about climate change. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't talk about ways to improve the environment. I'm all behind that. But by pretending to say that these don't exist, that's starting to show you that the argument being presented actually is disingenuous, because it's trying to get you to believe in one particular set of things which moves towards a set agenda, which is my other issue with the New Zealand Herald article. You know, it talks about, you know, what, you know, apparently, you know, Agenda 21 does, which they do every single time they run an article like this. They never actually go and speak to somebody that actually has an informed opinion. That, with, you know, for example, I've got a degree in history, I've got a degree in political science. I've been writing about these subjects when we've been told that climate change didn't occur for over 25 years. So, you know, I think I know a little bit about this particular subject. They're never going to tell you about it. The journalists will say, this is what those people believe. And if you don't believe that, then you're a nutter. That doesn't really strike me as how proper journalism is actually meant to work. Of course, the other factor is, of course, the situation of, one of these things that they keep forgetting about in this situation, when they talk, oh, your Agenda 21 is going to cause depopulation. How ridiculous is that? Well, they fail to mention actually how UN policy works. It doesn't the UN goes, oh, we're going to have a policy today. This is what we're going to do, boys and girls. They come up with these policies around the world that discuss, there are different groups that come forward in new committees, but ultimately the way it's executed and the way it's put into place is actually carried out by things like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, and that's basically they control fire because they can control countries' debts. They can say you must do this or else we're going to affect your credit rating or we'll call on your debts situation, blah blah. Ultimately, you must privatise, otherwise that we will affect your debts, and that's all in turn carried out by the people that actually finance the World Bank and the IMF, which then gets into the people that are the strategic partners of the United Nations Agenda 2030 program, which again, not once have I ever seen a mainstream newspaper article point out that this UN policy, Agenda 2030, which is what evolved out of Agenda 21, who their strategic partners actually are. They wouldn't dare do that, because if they did, then what you actually have is not only do you have some of the biggest polluters on the planet, including the feared fossil fuel industry, BP, Chevron, Shell, they're all there. No, don't deny their ratbaggery. Don't get me wrong there. But you also know some of those companies are actually moving out of petrols and they're moving into things like lithium batteries and water privatisation. Certainly that's the case with Nestle's, and certainly that's the case with Coca-Cola, who, of course, aside from actually sucking up all this water, which they then sell because they believe that literally water isn't right, it should be a private asset, are the ones that manufacture these massive plastic bags, Coca-Cola bottles, which are creating mountains of Coca-Cola, which and then getting into our sea and polluting the water. Let's go back to glass, Yes, there's lots of things. I was raised on a book called The Whole Earth Catalogue. If you ever get one, get your hands on it. Brilliant. Full of lots of really common practical things that we can do to improve our planet, which didn't require us having to pay a tax. It actually believed that if you gave people informed information, gave them informed solutions, and gave them a share of the ownership of that problem, it would resolve itself. Unfortunately, our New Zealand Herald hasn't read the Whole Earth Catalogue, and they should believe in the United Nations, which the person who wrote the story has no idea actually how the UN works because they've never actually studied it. They're just following a narrative. We must shut these people down. So, as I say somewhere myself, I sometimes get very frustrated because on one level I've got this corporate media that really do tell some absolute whoppers of lies, versus a alternative media which at times can be fairly caustic and misogynistic and can be even equally full of people who feel that just because they've got access to the Uncle Google and the electricity, they become right to be an expert and they don't have to apply any methodology research methods as well. I always say, if someone says something, they've got to provide empirical data. I stated what I said in my story. The websites below that, I've listed the links. I've given you 15 courses. In each of those cases, I've given you material from mainstream newspaper articles, which I've done purposely because I'm saying, look, I'm not making this shit up. I'm drawing from the same people. The New Zealand Herald want to tell you, oh no, the idea that the military might be behind creating fires. And yet, the same article does a huge thing about China and Russia's about to manipulate the atmosphere. They've got another article about weather-making process of China that covers basically the area of Africa. Well, you can't have it both ways. This is your information. Maybe your journalists need to go back and read your own material. So, again, look at who's saying this information. And there's this whole, of course, final problem that we got is that it seems to fall in these days every day that an argument comes up that you've got to be in one case or the other. Whether it's, I'm not even getting a subject matter, let's just keep it tight. I do believe that you can believe in climate change as being a contributing factor to the fact that the world's getting a harder place to live in. I know that because my family's environment and our first-hand experiences and how it's affected our livelihoods. So I'm not going to pretend that this is good. I know this because I was looking at this stuff when I was 18 years old, and being told by the people now that are telling you that they're the experts and we should listen to them. They were telling me, oh no, that's not an issue. There hasn't been this. The science hasn't come in yet. Now that there is a payroll behind it and there's a career picture, they've changed their tune. Same situation we get with the 1080 possums. The Greens going, oh no, we must pesticide. Again, by Bayer, Monsanto, the UN, Agenda 2030 partners. Same people going, well, what about Rod Donald? Rod Donald gave you lots of very practical ways that we could run a policy of containment, use it to fuel local economies. Now, because that policy gets in the way of this neoliberal global agenda, I talked to Nandel Tansos about it. Pretends he's never heard it. This is, anybody that grew up, I'm 50 years old nearly, grew up watching Rod Donaldson walking into Parliament with his possum fur seat filling his possum fur pie, this was his mark. This is what he was all about. But now we don't have that, so we've just got a whole bunch of political parties in New Zealand saying the same globalist bullshit largely funded by the same people, reported as this is the truth by corporate media, that it's getting smaller and smaller. In Australia, there are people out there, unfortunately, and this is that you get, caught between a rock and a hard place. You get the people like Morrison who turn around and go, oh no, there's no such thing as global warming. Oh, it's all a bunch of fucking lefty greeny shit. Well, those people are fucking morons too, and unfortunately, I can't help but think that's what they're actually paid to do. You've got to have the false fucking puppet. However, getting back to this report right now, ultimately the one out of this is all water privatisation. And if you go and even you just do a little bit of a fractional research into actually what water privatisation is doing in Australia and how much it's affecting its local economy, the concept of the fact of the people not having enough food to actually feed themselves and thus starving isn't as crazy as you might seem. And we have the same situation here in New Zealand. You're not allowed to go out and hunt your venison and wild possum. That's becoming harder and harder. New registrations, you can't go and fish. Putting in the highways down the coast of Kaikoura, so you can't go and get in kai. We've been moved further and further away from our ability to actually be sovereignly independent for ourselves, and more that we have to rely on food monopolisation by the very people that want you to believe in their model. These are the junkies that have hijacked the medicine cabinet. They're now saying to you, oh, listen to us. And yet, any of you guys out there that go, oh, no, I believe in climate change. Fine, no worries. Believe in climate change. Okay? Believe that we need to do things to improve the planet. Totally support that idea. But go and have a look, first of all, at the people behind the policies that are telling you, oh, no, science is all great, fantastic. These are the people that stand to profit from it. The DuPont, the Monsantos, the Bayers, the pharmacists, Goldman Sachs, the Nestle's, the Coca-Cola, and they're the ones that are behind this. Now, if you're under 30, I can slightly forgive you. You might not have actually know anything about these companies and what fucking track record they actually have. But if you're my age, and now that you know these are the people that are actually behind it, there is no excuse for you not to start questioning whether or not their version has room for maybe a bit more complexity. Maybe that the argument's not as black and white as you've been led to believe. Maybe the New Zealand Herald are talking a load of bullshit when they leave out half the key facts of an argument to slam other people. That's not journalism, that's spin doctoring. So have a look at the links I put on the page. Have a look at the video that I've done on water privatisation in New Zealand, because of course what is happening in Australia, the contributing factor which is drawing everyone towards this, oh, you must believe this thing or else we're all going to burn, are the same things that are happening here in New Zealand. Everywhere we looked in terms of where the wastewater occurred, which has only been like a year and a half story thing that suddenly occurred. We've got Hamilton, computer programs go down to Otago. Gosh darn it, just happens, the fire occurred, just happened to be in the area where basically all the water reserves are. Christchurch, again, cases of places, everything for time it's been arsonists originally started off, a lot of the original fires that started off there. Same in Nelson. You look at the way it actually happens when you read the fine print on those arsonists, they don't get charged. They cause millions and millions of dollars of damage and they don't get charged. I'll be really interested to know of the 100+ people in Australia that actually caused arson. I already know the half answer. How many were juveniles, which means they get a lot of leeway in the law. You're looking at basically 70% of that. I'd like to know how many of those people are collectively, and then the older ones, are in the care of mental behaviour, or it'll be very easy to actually get them to steer something towards that way. Otherwise, it's quite realistically that people are turning around and actually starting the fires, because, that shit unfortunately does actually happen. But when you also look at councils that have been told, no, you can't put fire breaks in. That's what the Aboriginals have done for 50,000 years, and it's worked really, really well. But no, we're not going to do that. And that actually adds fuel to the fire. You're adding to that whole situation of create the problem, say there's a problem, and then be seen to rescue the problem, when in actual fact you are the instigator. So that's my little 20-minute video on the issue of fires in Australia. I think there's some stuff in there, and when you start to even look at things like, I didn't even cover the issue of electromagnetic weaponry. Again, New Zealand Herald says, oh no, these things don't exist, while they report that China actually is developing these atmospheric-based weapons. And yet, again, throughout Australia, through the radar installation situation, through things like the fireball that took place in Australia in 1993, 35 miles away from the electronic Laverton, that's what I was trying to think, the electronic warfare station Laverton, which is where this farm was brought up by the same cult that carried out the mass terrorist attacks in Tokyo. Well, they had 2 inquiries into that. One in Australia, one in the United States, about whether or not those guys were actually playing around with that particular type of technology. Okay, both were inconclusive. But if you go and read the Australian National University, Canberra, and you start looking for electromagnetic weapons, and you look for the word cope, you will actually find several texts, academic texts, about an academic called Cope, who talks about Australia's electromagnetic supermarine weaponry, which, if you read through the material, says they got them from former Soviet military hardware, which is where our friends, the Japanese, were believed to have brought it in, because that's what the Australian Federal Police reported in 1993. And during that situation, hundreds of witnesses that were testified during the Australian Senate reported seeing these fireballs in the sky. So the idea of electromagnetic weaponry in that area isn't just not ridiculous because that technology exists and because the New Zealand Herald reported upon the Chinese having it, but because we've got precedent examples of it being used in Australia. There are lots of photos out there of the Doppler radars, which again use propaganda and instigate it. So, before you turn around and dismiss these things because the New Zealand Herald tells you to say so, go and do a little bit more digging. See if you can find some other but mainstream source material out there that actually demonstrates that these arguments are not as ridiculous as they seem. Because that's what I've done, and I now conclude that, yes, this is one of the contributing factors towards the fires in Australia. And we should pay attention because it has an indication of what's happening here with wastewater in New Zealand. It's all ultimately about water privatisation and giving monopolisation and centralisation to a few people that would love to control the mineral resources, the food resources, create carbon taxes to give us an additional taxes. None of that shit is actually genuine environmentalism. It's not what people who genuinely love the planet would do. It's allowing the junkies who brought about all these problems to begin with, putting them back in charge and saying, you fucked up, so now we're going to trust you again. That strikes me, doing the same thing over and over and over again, strikes me a little bit like their definition of stupidity. Have a bit of a think, have a bit of a discussion amongst yourselves, and I'll leave you on Ben's World TV to think about that.